just quickly, I don't. Again, we could probably spend weeks going through when lilacs last on dooryard bloom, weeks that we do not have. But at the very end, the last stanza, passing the visions, passing the night, unloosing the hold of my comrade's hands, letting go, right? Letting go. And again, Whitman would have held the hands of Union soldiers who were dying or recovering at the hospitals. Passing the song of the hermit bird. Passing, I leave thee, lilac with heart-shaped leaves. I leave thee there in the dooryard, blooming, returning with spring. So Whitman is moving forward. He has left the sprig. He has left the poem. Writing the elegy, people reading the elegy, is the way of mourning and moving on. Leaving the sprig is our act of homage to the dead president. Funerals is how we, bringing flowers to funerals. Burials, we have rituals in which to help us through the loss of someone. And Whitman is doing that for the whole country here with Lincoln, for himself as well. And the last few lines, lilac and star and bird. So Lincoln, the star, Venus, the lilac, Whitman's tribute, and the bird, Whitman is the bird, twined with the chant of my soul, there in the fragrant pines and the cedars dusk and dim. And for some reason, I still don't quite know why, cemeteries often have cedar trees planted in them. So that tells us cemetery. Whitman connects and stays connected to Lincoln and the dead through this poem. The lilac, which blooms every spring, connects us to Lincoln and the dead, and us now to Whitman, now that you have read this poem. And it evolves every time I read it. And I have a lot left to learn about this poem. But whenever I see lilacs bloom in spring, I think of three things. I think of this poem. I think of Whitman and Lincoln. That's one thing. The second thing I think of is the lilac that was at the backyard of the Berninger farmhouse I grew up in. And I remember the day that my mother absolutely insisted, I was in first grade, that I bring a sprig of lilac to my first grade teacher, Mrs. Music. And my mom said, wait, that, no, you've got time. And by the time she went and got the sprig of lilac, the bus came, honked its horn, and took off. And I missed the bus because my mother insisted I bring lilac to Mrs. Music. And I think Mom had to drive me to school because of that. So, but I'll never forget the stress of that moment. Not sure why I'm including that here, but hey, smells, flowers do have attachments to us. So Whitman, in some ways a classic Whitman poem. It's about connection, but in this sense, it's about loss and sort of leaving that person behind, but also staying connected to the person. Mourning isn't about forgetting the person you've lost. Mourning is about settling on a relationship with the person that you've lost, and moving ahead, but always having that person with you. And I think that's what we see here. It's also a free verse poem, right? And it's Whitman always including himself in his poems, almost always writing in the first person. Okay, so the other reason I brought you down here to Stuyvesant Landing with me today is to look at the Hudson River. And Whitman's poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, which is about crossing, I think it's actually the East River, but the Hudson starts up at Lake Tier of the Clouds in the Adirondacks up north. And the Hudson, as we know it, really as the river that it is, starts around Troy. Now, it's an estuary. Are you listening? It's an estuary. Are you with me? The Hudson River is an estuary from Manhattan to Troy. That means sometimes it flows south, sometimes it flows north. It's a tidal river. If those of you who used to, not now, drive from Greene County over to Columbia Green, if you look to the right as you're coming over the bridge, keeping your eye on the bridge as well, sometimes there's an island, sometimes there's not. It depends if the tide is in or out. In regular conditions, the river goes up and down about 4 feet, I believe, with the tide. So I've heard tell that if I threw a stick in the water here, the stick would move back and forth past me a few times before I wouldn't see it anymore. So crossing Brooklyn Ferry now, now I believe if I have my New York City geography right, Brooklyn is to the east of Manhattan, where Whitman would have been crossing from. So it's actually the East River, but the Hudson River flows down through between separating Columbia and Greene County, and then once it gets to Manhattan, it splits, and on the west side of the island of Manhattan, it's the Hudson River. On the left side, it's the East River. That's really beside the point. So crossing Brooklyn Ferry is about Whitman's connection with you. Whitman's connection with you. Whitman's connection with the reader. Whitman's connection with anyone reading his poem. And he talks about moving like the river back and forth through time. Back and forth through time. Connecting with us. Every time I read that poem, we're going to talk about it in class, it gives me the shivers, because I really do feel like he's talking to me. But the Hudson River is an essential part of the poem, because he's crossing the ferry that takes people back and forth from Brooklyn to New York, and he's leaning over the railing, looking at the water, looking at his own reflection. He's looking at the beams coming out from his head as the sun is behind him, and he sees the beams in the water as he goes out through time and space, connecting to people before him and people after him. And when you read the poem and when we discuss it in class, he'll be connecting with us, which is pretty darn cool, if you ask me. So think of Whitman when you think of the tide going in and out. Think of Whitman and Abraham Lincoln when you see a lilac blooming. So hope you're all doing well out there. I think our class is going splendidly. Keep up the good work, everybody, and I will see you around.